Hello, Reanimated fans. This is the episode 290 of Reanimated, the podcast about all things zombie, undead, vampire, gross, and others, various and sultry potpourri other topics. My name is Stuart. I'm coming at you from the Pacific time zone, and joining us from the Atlantic is the inimitable H.A. Conrad. Hello.
Hello.
What is new with you?
Well, we had to take a slight hiatus last week just due to some work stuff, but what that means is that we got a couple of little news tidbits, but we're going to be talking about 2 episodes of Fear the Walking Dead, and I have to say, after watching them, I'm kind of happy that we are combining them. But we'll be discussing The Holding and In Dreams. And but ahead of that, we got a couple of little news items. Just wanted to throw out there, not going to get too far into the weeds with this, but in terms of COVID stuff, New York seems to be opening up like really quickly in somewhat of a nail-biting kind of a way. They announced that restaurants are going to be open 75% for inside dining. People are out in the streets. There's still a lot of outdoor dining and things like that. And I think it really, again, depends on what part of the city you're in. And I had last weekend, spent some time on the Lower East Side where it's as if nothing has ever happened, though still some mask wearing, but not as much as my neighborhood. So I think it really does vary by neighborhood what people are doing. Still here in the Slope, people are wearing a lot of masks, being pretty cautious about that particular issue, even though it has now come out in terms of, they're basically saying, you know, if you're outside, it's fine if you don't have masks on, as long as you're not in crowded areas. But people still seem to be staying pretty adamant about the mask thing. So that's where we are here. Where are you there?
My lifestyle hasn't changed all that much. We've been going, we went out, we've been socializing a little bit more. Now that me and my neighbors on either side are all vaccinated, you know, it's like we can have a glass of wine in the backyard again and feel completely fine with that. Whereas before, even if we were all outside and 6 feet apart, it was awkward and weird. And now we can just sit around a table and not feel weird about it at all. So that's honestly, it's been just like a real return to feeling normal about socializing in a smart way. The headlines that I'm seeing that are troubling to me, and understandably, are more children. Infection rates are going up among kids, and they're higher than they were this time last year. And Colorado apparently had some sort of like fairly weird spike in kid infections. And so, Pfizer is set to open it up to 12 and over probably next week. That's great. But what about those, 2 and overs? And I think I've heard a rumor that it was September's maybe in the works. It's just, we still got a ways to go, and we've got a very vulnerable population still out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of troubling pieces of information with that. One, I think that because people are socializing, and look, it's not impossible to spread it if you're vaccinated, and if your kids aren't vaccinated, then that's probably part of where this is coming from. Though in Colorado, I think the vaccination rates are not as high. So I also think that some of the opening up that has been happening has also allowed some people who are not getting vaccinated and who don't think that there needs to be caution, they're out there probably socializing just as much. I don't think it's shocking that that's the population going up since they're not vaccinated, right? But I'm not a scientist, so definitely this is just an observation and in my own opinion, not anybody else's. But that's my guess. There's also, variants out there that are probably going to go, and every single company that's putting out vaccinations basically says there's going to have to be boosters pretty sooner rather than later. But I do think that it's good that kids 12 and over can be, and I hear you, because it's like September is a long time to wait for younger kids to be vaccinated, but I think they're also being cautious about the trials and things like that. But I really hope that it doesn't continue to spike for the younger population. But I also, look, we have had very high vaccination rates in New York, but we're still asking people if you've been vaccinated, if you're if you've gotten both shots, if you're past the 2-week point, even amongst our friends and circle of friends, because it was sort of like, we opened up in terms of them opening up the vaccinations to different age groups, it was pretty fast here, but people are still in the process of doing that. So you kind of don't want to jump the gun, right? And put anybody at risk. But yeah, we'll have to just see what happens. And then in other parts of the world, it's not so great. I mean, India continues to be terrible, and it just seems to get worse every day, unfortunately. So we also have to watch that because it's such a massive population of people spreading it. The variant issue is a big issue, like the mutation issue, because that's the concern, is that somehow it's going to make I have a sort of a circle around the current vaccinations, but hopefully, so far, I mean, I don't know if you saw the news this week, but Moderna and Pfizer both, basically saw that even with the variants that they knew about and things that were later than when they tested, the vaccinations protect against severe cases and hospitalization, which is very good news. So hopefully that will continue.
Yeah, that's been our local experience too. With we had something like, I don't know, 70 breakthrough cases, but none of them required hospitalization.
Right.
So even though that's breakthrough is one of the terms that you use for folks who get COVID after being vaccinated, and their results have been so far much better.
Good.
However, in non-COVID news, we only have a couple tidbits of news today. One of which was an article based on a Jeffrey Dean Morgan interview, which I found to be fascinating.
Me too, right?
First of all,
the
job that Jeffrey Dean Morgan took that almost got him to quit Hollywood altogether.
One of the things that I was just, fascinated by with this article was also that I guess I didn't realize he was in so many of these other, I knew he was in Supernatural. I guess I forgot that he was in Angel. I don't recall him from that, so I'm going to have to go back and see what he was in that show. But the acting job he took, which was basically to pay the bills, was as an alien doctor on Star Trek Enterprise. And
the Scott Bakula Star Trek.
Yep, and I vaguely remember this. I don't know that I followed this as much as others, but
I did not watch. I've tried to watch this show since, now that it's on streaming, and I'm just I don't really have it in me.
There were some good parts of it, but unfortunately for that show, they got kind of steeped in the whole writer's strike, and you could tell, they kind of tried to reinvent it several times, and so it lost its way. But there were some good characters and good moments in there. But in any case, apparently the prosthetics and the makeup process for this really just caused him to almost come home, or not almost, apparently he was coming home in tears and whatever. And I do hear that, and if you're already sort of I don't know, it's not psyched about doing a job, I can imagine that this might have been a demoralizing situation. I don't know. What did you think about it?
I scrubbed through this episode. I think it's on Netflix. I scrubbed through to find what scenes he was in the prosthetics, and to see if there was anything of him not in prosthetics, just because it was Star Trek, and maybe they had a scene of him in disguise as a human, because it's like a time travel episode also.
Yep, I remember. I vaguely remember this, but I didn't realize it was him in it, I suppose.
Yeah. So and there are scenes of him, and I think there's one or two other aliens too in this getup, but he has. It's definitely a small minority of the episode. Most of it is a la Star Trek in a time travel episode, where they're just dressed as humans of the 20th century, wandering around, and then here and there, these crazy aliens, and it is a significant prosthetic costume.
Yeah.
But he talks about tubes up his nose and the discomfort of the prosthetics, like you said. It's just I feel bad for him, but it's also. And I know that the dude who played Gimli in Lord of the Rings also had a really negative reaction to his prosthetics. His face got he had an inflammation. I feel.
Yeah, he was allergic to latex and some other stuff apparently, which caused this issue. So I could imagine. And I mean, look, when you have something that is this major, I can see how this could feel totally claustrophobic and whatever. And if you kind of already took this, because you needed to, and then I don't know, and I think if I recall correctly, this character had a significant amount of like screen time, but still
Not
like probably
really.
like he had a story arc where but then to have to spend that much time in the makeup chair and then,
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know.
from watching the episode or going back and looking at it, it was like maybe he was on screen for 5 minutes, but one of those is an action scene, and he does have like a back and forth with Scott Bakula. I just, like Jeffrey Dean Morgan is a handsome guy, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
isn't
yeah.
that's his cachet
That's
in
his
Hollywood
thing.
now?
Yep.
And he had to cover up the moneymaker to put things up his nose. I'm sure
Yeah,
it was a
yeah.
lot about that too. But
He was probably not
so I'm glad
excited.
he didn't quit acting because he's been good as Negan, even though the story around that has kind of sucked at times.
Yeah, agreed. But in any case, very happy he stuck it out and that Star Trek didn't put him off acting forever, so that's a positive thing. And then next up, there is apparently some movement on the last chapter of George Romero's, his of the Dead films with his
Just say
widow.
it, HA. Say it. What is it? It's called
The what? The
you don't want to
Twilight.
call it a sextology?
No, I didn't. But it's going to be called Twilight of the Dead, and
Yeah.
his widow is at the helm, Suzanne, and so looks like it's kind of moving forward. So we'll have to see what that brings. But
Mm.
I know you put that in there just so I would have to say it, and I wasn't going
Yeah.
to.
I actually looked up the word for what is a six Pete, and yeah, sextology. Pretty great. Yeah, I'm extremely skeptical about this project because
Oh
we've already
yeah.
heard about his daughter was doing something. His son
Mm-hmm.
has his own thing where he's a comic book writer who might, I don't know if he dabbles also in film, and now the widow, it starts to feel a
Yeah,
little bit like a cash grab.
it does feel like a cash grab, and who knows? I don't want to be negative about it because I do think that maybe there is an idea that you're just going to finish this out, but is that really necessary? Probably not. But anyway, we'll have to see what comes. We could be wrong, and maybe there's some people involved, and it looks like there's some interesting people involved, so maybe it'll be better than we think.
Maybe
So I reserve judgment. Nothing can be as bad as Toilet Zombie or whatever that was that we watched. Zombie Ass.
zombie ass.
I'm
Yeah.
still using that as the worst film
That
ever.
was the lowest point,
It
but
was the
we've had
lowest
a few
point.
other low points too.
But
Recent memory.
let's move on to talk about Fear the Walking Dead. And so,
Season
yeah,
6, episode 11, The Holding, uh, directed by Casey Cowell and written by Channing Powell, and this came out on May 2nd. And honestly, my overall is this was a good episode. I was like, remember where we left off? It was that stupid Virginia
yep,
episode,
yep,
right?
yep.
This was the change of direction that I wanted, because at the end of the Virginia's death episode, Wes and Lucy were going off to join up with Al and Alicia, I believe,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and they are the four heroes featured in this episode. And I was very excited to see more of Wes and Lucy, and we do get more of Wes and Lucy in this episode. And so I was, and I still am. I'm very bullish on this episode. I feel like this was a success. It was a good story, and it worked for the most part. And it fleshed out this new faction better.
I couldn't tell whether it was a good episode or it was just so much better than the last one that it made it seem better. But agree with you. Like, we've been kind of wanting to know what this faction is. They've been kind of putting out hints hints with them. We've seen, the stuff with Morgan when he was battling with those two guys about the key. And so, and obviously with getting rid of Virginia, they need to have some conflict or some enemy. So I was hoping they would at least get to this point at some, at some possible part of their timeline. So that was kind of cool. It felt a little bit disjointed, like suddenly they were there, but I kind of liked that. But the one thing I will say once again, even though this is pretty much a Wes-centered episode. There's a lot of Wes in this. There's still not enough of him and enough of him being highlighted that, I don't know. I was really, and we have a little bit of Luciana in there too. But given that this is sort of centered around Wes's story, I guess I just wanted a little bit more from him and a little bit like like he's definitely the hero in this, but part of me
Well,
just
I don't know. Alicia has the hero moment.
she is the hero moment. So that was it. It troubled me a little bit just because Wes is had to do the hardest thing in this episode, and
For sure.
there were some interesting things about that in this episode. Just sort of a character having to face what the reality is versus what he thought it was, which I think was kind of interesting. But basically, this is one of those moments where, again, it's a little bit like Lost, where you see, like, the opener is of this organization slash group of people, settlement, whatever you want to call it. These are the people that have been underground. These are the people that have been sabotaging Virginia's, the tank town and other things, and basically trying to infiltrate and take down Virginia's settlements. And we haven't really known that much about them at all, other than that, almost to the point where, is it real that they're doing it? Is it like a big thing? And this indeed shows that it's an organized group of people doing this. And not only are they organized, but they seem to be thriving underground. They've got hydroponics set up. They've got omelet stations.
Chickens.
They've got chickens. They've got, and it seems as if living is pretty good down here, other than the fact that they don't really have sunlight. And at least it appears that they are in harmony with each other, though it definitely, without question, has a very culty feel, because you've got the propaganda being over this loudspeaker at all times. It's a constant in this episode of Teddy talking about his purview of life and how everybody is going to eventually see this.
This emphasis on can you see it, or like what do you see? And I just want to see like Teddy. And I frankly I don't feel like I have ever come to understand what they see, or what the right answer is to stare at this zombie and tell me what you see.
Right.
I'm pretty much with all the others on that. And their introduction is there's something very transparent about what they're there to do, though, that it doesn't feel like this cult group really is savvy enough, because they literally are like standing in the middle of the room at several junctures, just like conspiring.
Yep.
It feels a little, so that part does, I feel like, fall a little flat, because you're like, all right, this is a very this group is like, they're manipulating other settlements. They are doing the thing actively that Alicia, Al, Wes, and Lucy are there to do to them, in a way. Mm-hmm. Except they are more destructive, and they really, and our heroes are on more of a recon mission. But they're looking for weaknesses. I mean,
well, right, and our people are not exactly subtle about the fact that they're doing this, and sound carries a lot, and so like they do some of these things like not very stealthily. So agree with you. This was kind of a weird thing, and I also think that the other part of this, although they've seen Virginia's settlements running pretty well, people have food, people have clothing, and there is somewhat of a harmony going on, and maybe that's why it's not so shocking. But to come upon this settlement that has been sort of doing these destructive things and see that it's, culty, but also seems to be harmonious, I think had to be a bit jarring. And look at what Morgan is trying to build, something a little different, and something, so it's got to be a little bit hard to sort of wrap your head around that, even though you know that this group of people has been doing these destructive things, or you're trying to figure that out or figure out why. And again, I think it is putting that question about, and we've seen this even with like Negan's leadership, with other, like all these different quote unquote civilizations or groups of people. All of them have to kind of rally around one sort of centralized idea of what they're going to be. And so I do think that there is that weird question, like, well, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, right?
So here's a question about their MO. They're trying to find this key. And unfortunately, this was that spoiler in that article that and I've seen other people talk about it quite openly, and I don't know that this was ever divulged in the story. But in theory, This key is for a nuclear submarine,
Yeah,
right?
which I knew it would probably. I did not read the spoiler, but I assumed that it has to. If it's something that's going to be that big, I assumed it was going to have to be for some atomic something or other. I thought maybe, I thought maybe a power station or something. So
And so this is their end game, but they've been after this key to this submarine, like the key. I don't know what the key is actually going to do. If it's like opens the hatch, or if it's something they need to
arm
get access,
something, right?
arm something. Yeah, and they've been after it since the very first episode of this season, when in that opening scene with the bounty hunter and the
Yeah.
guy who was running away who had the key originally. But also since that scene, they have done their other attacks, and like they've blew up Tank Town since then. So they
Mm-hmm.
already had their end game, literally their nuclear option in play, but they were still running these other ops. And I'm curious, like, why they feel the need to work so hard to destabilize the area, and that the tagging, the graffiti. What is the point if your next move is we're gonna nuke everything? And
Yeah,
I'm a
and
little bit
I'm
confused.
I'm puzzled by that too. I'm also puzzled by that in because if you are planning, I mean, I guess my thing is like why can't they just kind of leave everybody alone up above ground and just go below ground if that's their end game?
Because
It doesn't
they
seem
nothing
like
can continue unless everything above is gone. Is like there is the way that they eventually describe it.
right, but it
But they
doesn't.
can't take care of the entire continent or the rest of the world. So I don't know what, like they're
Well, that's my point, and also
yeah,
like they seem to be honestly, if they just kind of stayed below ground, I don't know that anybody would bother them.
right.
It doesn't seem like anybody had infiltrated or known enough about them. It's kind of them that are starting these weird conflicts with other people. And maybe that's the part of the culty part that we're not getting. And that's why it's so
Yeah.
crazy is that there is no need to
Yeah.
do that. And this guy, Teddy, is just kind of like doing his crazy megalomaniac thing to have some power thing, a power ideal or something.
We certainly haven't been around them a huge amount yet to get the total story on it, and we have no idea how many of them there are, and if there's like more than one. I mean, you get the impression this is the only shelter or whatever, right? The holding.
Right, right. But and so they come in there. It's pretty to me and to you, and I think to everybody, it's pretty transparent what Felicia and her group are, or Alicia and her group are doing, and I think that they would be a lot more cautious about letting them run around. I also think that it's pretty transparent in terms of doing the questioning and all the weird stuff about do you see this and do you see that, and inviting them to stay in the underground permanently was very hasty. It didn't seem to be.
Yeah.
It didn't seem like it made a ton of sense, but I guess they got to push the storyline along, so we can't do certain things without having them having some freedom. And then, of course, we've got the big reveal in this, which is that Wes's brother is still alive and has been living with them, and not only living with them, but orchestrating and carrying out some of these terrorist attacks against Virginia, but also against other people that they know. And I guess my thing about that whole storyline, I think that it was a cool idea to have him be alive, but I think the thing that I found, there was some puzzles there. One is that it feels a little weird that he would just, I know they kind of tried to explain it like that, Wes had his bike and he got away from him, but then later it's kind of evident that that his brother knew that he was Derek. Derek, is it? Is that what his name is? The brother.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
That he knew that Wes was alive and that Wes was in Tanktown. It's pretty clear to me that he did. And
Oh yeah. Yeah.
so
By the end,
that's
that's pretty clear.
that's pretty clear. So
And so they know that they're associated with Virginia's group.
right.
And yet they're acting, and maybe this is all part of this elaborate ruse, and they are actually more savvy than I'm giving them credit for, but it doesn't feel that way.
Right.
Even though, like, the only reason they use that information is to make Wes really despise Derek, because he was like, oh, I know that my brother's here, but I'm still gonna work to blow up Tanktown. And when Wes has that scene, and he's showing him the scar. You don't get the impression that Derek isn't actually appalled by the fact that Wes was in harm's way and almost died.
Right.
So I feel like it's a complicated sort of weave here that they're doing, but with Derek and his complicity in these crimes against people, like where he's killing innocents and trying to blow up civilization, and yet at the same time Riley, the other main I don't know what we're calling these people, End is the beginning, like doomsday cult guy, seems quite earnest in trying to get them to stay with them.
Right. And I mean, I do think that part of this is the whole idea of a cult. I mean, isn't that what we have seen just in terms of like people being sort of brainwashed? And I think, I do think that they walked that line pretty well in that, in theory, Wes knew that his brother was there, but it was very different from, say, seeing the damage that his actions had created, So, and he sort of seemed to shake himself out of the culty thought, or at least it seemed like he had shaken himself out of it for a minute.
Again,
although
that was more of that back and forth weavy stuff. Like he was actually, I mean,
he's
who
actually a
knows?
double
Maybe,
agent. Yeah.
maybe he had a moment of contrition, but then was like, what Teddy would do. Teddy says I have to be this guy, so we don't really know, and that's probably for the best. We don't need to have every single thought, expounded on for the audience, but you do want to have threads that feel consistent, and there is just a lot of back and forth here in terms of is Derek, what is Derek feeling, and how, when did he know what he knows, I guess.
And I mean, I do like how they give a bit of the background that his art is something that Wes clearly was recognizing, even though he wasn't quite sure that that's what it was, but it was definitely setting off some things with Wes. And I also think that the other part is that I do think that there were moments. I do think it's very complicated, and I do think that there were moments where Derek was, wanting to go with his brother, but he's now been sheltered. He was not only rescued by these people, but then sheltered by them and totally brought into their way of thinking. And I do think that that's exactly what they're setting up with Alicia towards the end of this episode, which is, and it's a little bit. We've heard this theme repeated multiple times. What was the main culty guy who seems all into it and trying to convince him to stay? I can't remember his name. Riley says, basically, I think he says it to Al, but basically says, all right, the skeptics and the cynics are who we really like to win over, because then they're sort of true believers. And I think that that's exactly what they're setting up with Alicia towards the end of this, where they're going to try to completely brainwash her and bring her over to their way of thinking, because there's nothing as strong and powerful as somebody who's completely converted. So, but we see sort of like the happy sort of nurturing piece of this thing, or at least what they think it is. It's like people eating rhubarb pie together underground, sustaining themselves. They seem to live in harmony together. But then you see like the ugly side of it, which is that anybody who is basically coming up against them, they freaking embalm and they put in a room, and which is like, super creepy, because they don't want them to become like real walkers, but they also don't want to like completely kill them. So that's kind of an odd thing, especially since embalming fluid is so flammable. So to me, that's a pretty big hole in their plans. But but they turn evil pretty quick. Like you see the evil side pretty quick.
I mean, the only positive side of this entire community, the only side of it that seems to be even like functional and productive, is literally just food.
Yep.
That's their whole life is we eat and we grow food and we eat it. Yep. And then we grow more food and we eat it, and we crush up zombies and we make dirt, and then we eat the food that grows in that dirt. Like there's nothing else.
Right. It's not exactly like they've got anything more than that.
It's not what I would call the best world building. It felt a little shallow.
It was a little shallow, and you wanted to see, other than just Teddy sort of expounding sort of your typical culty ideals, which is kind of what he did. It was a bit like a circle of life kind of like philosophies, just definitely borrowing from a ton of other things. And they build up this leader character as, something, I don't know, somebody that you think is going to be totally intimidating and whatever. And it's kind of funny that it ends up being like the dude from Smallville and Gremlins and
Oh,
Scrooge,
I
and
was thinking it's like the Colonel from Kentucky Fried Chicken.
he
He's just
kind of
like
looked
this
like that too. But
affable man who dresses in like herringbone. I don't know. It was weird.
yep. But like, I agree with you. I think they could have done a little bit better to see what these people were about, but it was still nice to see a different community and something a little different than we had been seeing.
Yeah, it makes way more sense than Virginia's community
Right.
in a way, even though these guys are like a doomsday cult and they don't make sense in a way because they're insane. At least this community has more of a narrative and a purpose, whereas Virginia's was just like, I don't know, it felt very rudderless to me. So I'm glad that they put a little more effort into this group. Like right from the get-go, you're like, yep, these guys have a thing. They are a certain kind of thing, whereas Virginia's group always just felt like
This doesn't make
amorphous.
sense. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And also that it didn't make sense that they would stay together or that it would even work,
Yeah,
given how
or that
many.
she would be in charge of them.
Right.
Right.
So that was kind of interesting. I do like seeing this group work, like our heroes. I like seeing them work together. I
And I
definitely.
like the scenes with Wes and his
Me
brother.
too.
Like
I
when
think
when
those were super strong, and again, that's what I mean when I say I'm a little disappointed, because these to me were like incredibly powerful scenes where basically he's having all of these feelings in this episode where it's like, oh my gosh, my brother's alive,
Mhm.
to then being like, oh no, my brother's a culty person and he's trying to bring me into the cult, and I'm going to try to bring him out, and then to this horrible acceptance that the people that he now surrounds himself with are people that he has to treat as family and protect them rather than his brother. And it's a horrible, like, the whole fight scene between them is really rough. It's a really tough scene, where his brother almost kills him and he realizes his brother is going to kill him. And he just turns the tables on him, and it's just gut wrenching. But
Yeah. I thought it was an interesting and yet believable turn that instead of letting his brother turn into a zombie and then like create chaos in that underground community, which I think would have been kind of like maybe a tactically smarter thing to do than shooting him after he's died or is dying, alerting all the baddies that there's something
something
happening.
amiss, yeah.
He still manages to get this the surprise over on Riley and the other heavies who are in the embalming room just in time to save the rest of the friends.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, they're. I thought it might have been. I mean, it's his brother. He's not going to let him turn into a zombie, I guess, on purpose. That feels maybe cruel, and I can understand why he didn't do it. Why he did the coup de grace, but it would have been. I feel like kind of a Daryl move, like
Yeah.
the smarter move to just like, all right, now you go out there, sow chaos, and I'm gonna get my buddies out of here, and going out the way we came in instead of this weird back way that you don't even know exists.
Well, I also think that you got to give him a little bit of slack because this is
Of
incredibly
course.
emotional, and I think that that's sort of what's feeding his reasoning for doing it. And I don't think he was thinking. I think he just didn't want his brother. I didn't think he wanted that on his shoulders as well, which is on his soul as well, which would have been pretty awful. So I kind of understand that, but agree with you. Tactically, it would have made a lot more sense for him to just kind of let his brother become a walker and let him loose. And then we've got. I do like they have a callback to Luciana when she's talking to us about this, and just about how it's easy to become these people and to do these things, and that she did them. And he's like, oh, but my brother wouldn't do that. And it's like, well, no, clearly your brother would and has. And
Mm-hmm.
but it was kind of interesting. Like, I was like when they were first sort of about to escape with Derek, I was like, oh my God, are they really going to trust him and bring him back to where their whole thing is? Because come on, this is not a good idea. So I was very glad that they called it out and that Alicia was like, yeah, we're not doing this. So that was, and then was clearly right when it turns out that he had betrayed them. So it was that at least made me happy that they didn't do a whole thing where he shows up into the Morgan community and then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, I'm still a cult member. So I was glad that they handled that there and then.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think that Alicia, they build up the whole thing where she's talked about her mom and talked about her mom's sacrifice, and so they build up that whole thing, which I think we all kind of knew was coming at some point, right? That she's going to try to emulate her mom. So there's that whole thing, and then
What do you think? Alicia Debnam Carey dying this season?
maybe. I mean, they seem to be sort of threading that needle, right? Feels a little
Could
bit like
be.
it.
I mean, she's been on the show since the first season. I think the way it's been going, in my opinion.
Yeah, I
she,
know. Maybe she wants something else, which you could understand.
God.
So there's that.
She does have that awesome boss moment, even after everybody else has escaped and she's done her thing. There's the fire. There was so much fire, we couldn't see anything, says the other people
Yep.
after they've left. And then Alicia's just like there, and the room looks singed, but doesn't seem like that much damage has really even been done. The embalming machine still works, apparently.
Yep.
And she has that cool boss moment, though, where she takes out and kills the embalmer
Oh yeah, that
man,
was
who's
pretty
a big
awesome.
dude. And so that was pretty boss.
And she kills him with the embalmer, which was pretty sweet. I liked
Yeah.
that. I liked how that happened. That was good. That was a pretty.
But that's that hero moment that Wes is kind of robbed of, even
Yep.
though he has the like you said, the horribly emotional, destructive moment. I mean, Cain and Abel style.
Oh yeah,
Bad
totally.
juju. But she gets the moment where she pulls one over on the guy, like the David and Goliath moment she
Yep.
gets. So you go full biblical on this. And then she has to face off with the Colonel from Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yep. And I'm not looking forward to the brainwashing part, which I'm assuming is what they're going to do with her.
Will she be the Manchurian Candidate? Will she be the secretly faking it hero still? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yep.
And in the meantime, we're going to have to watch In Dreams,
Yes.
which was a hot garbage episode. And speaking of Star Trek, it was a lot like a holodeck episode. One of my least favorite things from Star Trek: The Next Generation. Whenever they would do these, like,
Yes.
oh, let's be in a Dickensian novel for an episode, and this had a lot of those vibes for me.
So I've had this conversation with my sister and a few other people a lot, and this has been sort of a general theme with me. I want to hear what you think about it, but in general, any episode that involves dreaming or dream states and tries to confuse everybody with the fact that it's a dream and all that are things that I truly dislike in every single show I have ever seen. I don't know that I have ever enjoyed a dream state episode. What is your thought on that?
I'm 100% with you. I don't like abstract mixed in with my zombies either. I like practical, and I think I've been pretty consistent on that.
Yeah.
So across genres, I also tend to dislike this abstract approach where you're like, ooh, is it real? Is it not? Because that's frustrating for me, and I have no patience for it.
Yeah.
But In Dreams was directed by Michael Satrazemis, and then written, and this is usually a point of trouble. Shambliss Goldberg and Nazrin Chowdhury were all collaborating on writing this.
So I will admit, when I saw the writing team, I'm like, oh no.
Even before it started.
Yeah.
I mean, there was some promotional material where you see Morgan wearing that ridiculous white wig, because that man has male pattern baldness, I can tell, and he would not have a beautifully glowing white halo of hair in his old age. He would be a patchy haired man. So you were seeing these like promotional things, and I was like, oh God, please let it just be the cold open. Please don't let that be for the entire episode that we have to go through this. And it also like triggered those there were those dream sequences with Rick from season whatever it was, 9
exactly.
or 8.
I was like, no, this is just so lazy. This is so lazy. And and I was really annoyed by this. I was annoyed watching this entire thing. And let's talk about how annoyed I was at the ending too. But
I mean, Karen David hasn't had a lot to do this season. It was good that she had some work,
well,
you know?
that's the thing. I would have loved to see more of her doing, like, I don't know why they needed to do some crazy dream thing like this. Like, they could have just really made this about her going to try to get to June to try to deliver this kid.
Delivering a baby in a post-apocalyptic
Is
scenario
already
that
terrifying
also has
enough.
zombies, that is loaded with tension and drama. And
Right.
then loop in Riley and his gang of heavies coming after them. That's all you needed.
Yeah, you didn't need to do this, but okay, this is where they go with this. And and then you also have Morgan giving up the key for because based on her dreams.
Yeah, because she's
Really?
like, do it. I mean, she sounded pretty serious.
Yeah, but she's also in labor, and
When the woman having contractions is screaming at you, let me tell you, you do the thing that she's telling you to do.
okay, but I don't know. You're talking about the survival of their group, and this seems just totally insane to me that
Yeah.
Morgan would do this.
In his defense, it doesn't have like a nuclear symbol on the key. I think it just says like "do not duplicate." Like they got it made at a locksmith.
But in any case, but he does know that they're after something.
Yeah,
He does know that they're after something
that he's already killed multiple people or
who are
two,
trying to get
three.
this.
Yeah,
So I'm just saying, I just don't know that I buy that Morgan would allow this. But okay. I also don't know that I would buy that Riley would leave them alone after getting it. But
right. He's just like, good luck, because Riley's not actually such a bad guy. I don't know. He feels like a pretty bad guy.
he feels pretty bad. But
But let's talk more about this dream, which I don't want to do, but
I
there are
don't
some things in it.
either.
So we meet Athena, who is this, clearly the daughter of Grace, and they are walking through this pink. All the leaves are pink, right? Like you're like, okay, yeah, it's a dream. I get it. It's all happening. So Athena is 16. They go back to Lake Town or whatever they're calling Morgan's community, and honestly, I'm just like, yeah, the improvements that you've made in 16 years,
Not so much.
pretty weak. Like
Yep.
that's 6 months worth of improvements. They put some stairs in along the wall of the embankment. They did some paths and some like raised beds, and they have a new wall outside of the dam wall. But like that's it. That's all we see from,
Yep.
and there's a corral of horses. But come on, 16 years. I would like to see some actual buildings, I feel like.
Yeah, it still felt very bare bones. So there you
And
go.
some of the promotional stuff was like, what will Morgan's community look like in the future? I'm like, oh, really? It's just raised beds? Like you put in some walkways?
Right.
Awesome.
Yeah. Um, and then there's the whole thing where he doesn't recognize her, and I don't know why this is happening. And it's like that whole thing. And
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think it was pretty clear, at least to me, that it was not a real thing. That there was some kind of something going on.
They did some work to age up some of the characters. June, I think, actually looked pretty good for
Yeah,
June
she
plus
looked.
16 years.
Yeah. That was all right.
Daniel, I feel like would just be in a wheelchair
Yeah.
at this 16 years after where he is, after all the beatings he's taken. And, I mean, some of this is in the dream, I guess. Strand is also an old man. But then up come Sherry and Dwight,
Who have not
and
aged at all.
they haven't aged at all. And she's got an infant in her arms, and I'm like, she's like 30 something in the plot. How are we? She's just like a 47-year-old having babies in the apocalypse. No hospitals anywhere nearby.
Right. So
It's kind of insane.
yeah, so there's that. And then there's the whole thing that they always do in these things, like what's real, what's not. This is all built out of her Grace's memories and her weird her subconscious, and she has these adventures with her daughter. She's still trying to find Morgan. They have a Roy Orbison thing that's kind of tying it all together. The song's
Yes.
called "In Dreams," or whatever it is, and
Chambliss and Goldberg's obsession with music, it, I, I'm not loving. I've never loved it, mostly because it's always felt shoehorned in
yeah,
with Daniel's character, and with hers,
even more so.
yeah, it's just like, yeah, I don't think. I mean, And what Walkman is going to be working
All
27
right,
years after the
not
apocalypse?
just what Walkman, but what tape will play. We all had those tapes when we were
Yeah,
kids. Like, we
yeah.
all know that those things definitely deteriorate. They're not going to be working at this point. They're barely working now. So, yeah, that seemed a little stupid to me.
It's
And
just
then,
after the thing.
and then there's like the whole, tragedy of Athena and that she's born still, and that feels pretty awful.
This entire progression for them to like get closer to the geographical area where Morgan has her body in the real world. It's just like the fact that she's so aware of exactly what's going on, like she's
Yeah,
locked in or whatever, or locked
yeah,
out.
yeah.
That was frustrating. Obviously, this whole thing was frustrating. Morgan does kick some serious ass in that stable, and I was really happy to see that. But that
Me
was like
too.
45 seconds of payoff for this entire episode of
Yeah, and
45
then
minutes.
and then there's the whole like thing where she's dealing with stuff in the dream world, and there were way too many moments where she was just like, "Oh, I can hear him. Can't you hear him? I can hear him." You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that whole thing was just like ridiculous and overplayed.
Yeah. Holly was sitting next to me while I watched this, because we'd watched some Bridgerton, and then as a reward, I got to watch Fear the Walking Dead, and she's looking at her phone, and and then she hears every so often a snippet of dialogue where Karen David says to this woman who's playing her daughter, "We have to get there so that you can be born," and Holly's
Mm-hmm.
just fucking laughing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm so glad that you could be here to witness the show that I used to like being just completely
Off
terrible.
the rails, yeah.
And of course, her response is, "Hasn't this show been terrible for a long time?" And I was like, "You're absolutely right. I don't know. I have no defense anymore."
Yep. No, there's no defense for this. Bill caught not this one, but part of the last one, and was just like, "What is even happening anymore in this show?" And I'm
In the
like,
holding,
"Yeah, he just saw you. I think he caught the thing with the dude, the walker, who's just sort of like tied to the tree branch or whatever, and kind of made
yeah.
the same comment, and just was like, "All right, I'm gonna go leave you to this," because he can't even be in the background watching this kind of stuff. So,
And by the way, I was wrong. It was the episode before this. I've just kind of already blocked it out of my mind because I didn't want to remember it. Was Handle with Care, where Daniel has his amnesia and the
oh, that's
guns,
right, that's right. All
which was
right.
also a bad episode.
Also bad, but
But
again,
the holding by comparison was like a 7. I mean, Handle with Care, I think, was a 3. In Dreams is a 0 to
oh yeah,
me.
yeah, this is pretty bad. I'm very curious to see what everybody else disagrees with us about this, and they probably all love it.
Oh
But I
God,
hate
yeah.
this
Forbes is going to
thing.
be like, "In Dreams was a masterful
Yeah, no,
look at the
no,
human
this
psyche."
is terrible. Anytime, and I realized what kind of an episode this was within seconds of it starting, and I said, "Oh man, not a
I was really
dream
hoping it was just
episode."
going to be a short little, oh, and then she's going to wake up and it's going to be real again. But
Yeah,
no,
that's what I was hoping. And when they made the whole thing this, I was just like, "Oh, this is so lazy." So lazy, and then really depressing in terms of like what they did with it. So, I just, the whole thing where a community, and also look, let's also be, I guess this is maybe the whole idea. Like, I think every parent thinks their child is special. Every parent thinks their child is going to, and in this case, save the world. There's been an enormous amount of risk and stress carrying this baby because of her, and basically because of how the dad died, and also what she had to do to keep everybody safe in that power station. But then to have it end in this way, I just thought was really kind of gross, that they would do
it's.
this.
I feel like the tragedy is worthwhile, and it's kind of like it's the sort of thing that should be, yeah, like there's going to be a whole lot more infant mortality and maternal, pregnant. I forget what the doctor, the medical term is, but women dying in childbirth.
Yeah,
And this should be something that we see a lot more of,
right.
because this is old school, like ways that people died, like teeth,
Mm-hmm.
which we've talked about before. Another thing, yeah, like there are some shots of her baby daddy in this episode. I don't think we've ever seen this guy
No,
before, Matthew.
no, I think we saw a photo of him on the thing, and that
Was
was
there a
it.
photo on the
I
fridge in
think that
that
was
one
it,
episode?
or there was something like that.
I don't
And
know. Like, is this old footage or is this something that they've shot for this episode? It's kind of, I'm pretty curious because there's a few different scenes of the guy, like inside, outside, dying, not
yeah,
dying. And then we also they bring back the specter of the radiation poisoning, which had been central to whatever season that was. Remember when Morgan Stick was too irradiated to use?
Oh yeah, and then they somehow bring her back to, like, I'm just saying, like, I think she would be long dead, let's just put it that way, with the amount that she got exposed.
And they didn't know, she didn't know if it was radiation poisoning or morning sickness for the longest time.
Right.
And like this whole thing. And I'm just like, no, that was bad when you did that. Do not bring back the radiation.
Yeah, let's
stuff.
not do
you
it.
Clearly, you threw out that entire plot line mid-season, whenever that was a thing.
And now they brought it back, and I'm like, no.
And now you want to bring it back.
And what I was going to say is that, like, every parent thinks their child, but then to have the whole thing where, like, the whole thing is that, oh, everybody rallied around Athena. What are you even talking about? Like, nobody's
Raleigh and Sherry rallied around this baby who was born somewhere near them.
Yeah, what? Like, that doesn't even make sense.
Athena's birth was what got Sherry and Dwight back together.
Right? Like, I don't really even understand that, other than this is just sort of the delusions of a parent, which is, I guess fine.
Hey, my children are perfect.
Well, there you go.
Except that my son woke me up at 12:30 last night with a flashlight in my face.
Really?
It's just, family stuff, man. It's fun. Good times.
Parents. Anyway,
he's gonna bring the whole community together, HA.
I mean, clearly that's
through sleep deprivation.
That's his goal. But in any case, that's, I don't have much more to say about this, other than I guess we'll find out more about the key in the next one and what destruction they're gonna deal with. But
next episode is called JD, and it is directed by Aisha Tyler, if Wikipedia is to be believed. So I want to be hopeful. I want to believe. I'm very much on a string about to say to you, let's not watch Fear the Walking Dead anymore.
Ooh, maybe. We might have to, but I think we need to finish out this season.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, after this season, because if they end on 5 or 4 solid episodes, then I'll be like, okay, yeah, it's better. But there's just been a lot of stinkers this one.
Yep, this has been pretty rough. And I can't excuse it all because of COVID, because we have seen instances where that has not been a factor. So
yeah, like 4 out of most, I would say, in 85% of the Prime shows, clearly COVID shot extra episodes were really good. So
yeah,
we even like the one that everybody else hated.
Yeah, because we're nerds.
Apparently, we are very forgiving, but not of this show, because this is like objectively terrible.
Yep. Well, we knew when John Dorie died that was probably going to be what happened. But I think that's all I have to say about this. I'd love to hear what other people have to say. So, if you did love it and you're kind of like coming in against us on this, I would love to hear why. Also, if you're into dream episodes of shows, because I'm just not. But feel free to drop us a line on our website, reanimatedpodcast.com. You can send us an email, reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet at us. reanimatedpcast is the handle. And that's, and join us for the next dumpster fire episode, I suppose.
No, it's going to be great. I can't actually promise that. But yeah, join us again next time.
If we have low expectations, then we may not be disappointed. How's that?
Sure.
So.
Okay.
But until next time, ciao, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, guys, and bye.